The Scream in the Cornfield. In a small, forgotten town nestled deep in the Midwest of the United States, there was a cornfield that stretched as far as the eye could see. The locals called it the Silent Field, a place avoided at night due to the chilling tales told about it for generations. By day, the field was like any other, filled with golden stalks swaying gently in the breeze. But at night, it was rumored that strange noises echoed from its depths, sounds that made the blood run cold. Lucas, Sarah, and Jack were 3 teenagers from the town, restless and hungry for adventure. The townsfolk had warned them countless times to stay away from the cornfield, especially at night, but that only made it more appealing. Halloween was just days away, and they wanted a scare. Late one chilly evening, they parked their car on the dirt road just outside the field. The sun had dipped below the horizon, leaving only a faint glow in the sky. The wind whistled through the cornstalks, making them rustle like they were whispering secrets. "Are we really doing this?" Lucas asked, his voice betraying a hint of fear. He was tall and serious, the kind of guy who usually kept his friends out of trouble. But tonight he couldn't resist the thrill. "Come on, it's just a cornfield," Sarah replied, her eyes shining with excitement. She was bold, always ready to push the boundaries. She clicked on her flashlight, casting a beam of light into the tall stalks. Jack, the jokester of the group, smirked. "Maybe we'll run into the cornfield phantom, huh?" He laughed, but his voice had a nervous edge. They stepped into the field, the cornstalks towering above them like the walls of a labyrinth. As they walked deeper, the sounds of the town faded, replaced by an eerie silence. The air felt different in here, heavy, almost like it was pressing down on them. The 3 friends tried to keep their spirits up, joking and teasing each other. But as they walked, a strange feeling settled over them, like they were being watched. Lucas felt it first, a prickling at the back of his neck. He turned around, his eyes scanning the darkness behind them, but he saw nothing except the endless rows of corn. "You guys feel that?" he whispered, trying to keep his voice steady. Sarah shivered, though she tried to hide it. "It's just the wind. Come on, don't chicken out now." They pressed on, their footsteps crunching on the dry corn leaves scattered across the ground. Suddenly, a faint sound broke the silence. It was distant at first, like an animal cry, but it grew louder, turning into a shrill, blood-curdling scream. The sound seemed to come from all around them, bouncing off the cornstalks and filling the air with a sense of terror. The 3 friends froze, their eyes wide with fear. "Did you guys hear that?" Sarah asked, her voice barely a whisper. Lucas nodded, his heart pounding. That didn't sound like any animal. They looked at each other, debating whether to go back, but the thrill of fear pushed them forward. They were too curious, and maybe a little too stubborn, to turn back now. They walked deeper into the field, each step filled with dread. After what felt like hours, they stumbled upon an old, crumbling farmhouse standing alone in the middle of the field. Its wood was dark and rotting, with strange symbols carved into the beams above the door. The windows were shattered, and a chill seemed to radiate from the building. An old scarecrow hung nearby, its face twisted into an unsettling grin. Its eyes, black and hollow, seemed to follow them as they approached. The scarecrow's arms stretched out like it was trying to grab something, or someone. They could feel its presence, its lifeless eyes watching them as they neared the farmhouse. "I don't like this," Lucas muttered, his hands trembling. "Let's go back." But before they could turn, another scream ripped through the air, louder this time, closer. The sound was filled with a strange, almost human-like agony. It sent shivers down their spines, making them feel as if the scream was directed at them, pulling them into its horror. "We need to hide!" Sarah gasped, pushing open the door to the farmhouse. They stumbled inside, slamming the door shut. The house was cold and dark, filled with the scent of decay. Rotting furniture lay scattered across the floor, and strange symbols were scratched into the walls, symbols that looked like ancient runes. In the center of the room was a twisted altar made of dried cornstalks and bones, arranged in a grotesque display. "What? What is this place?" Jack whispered, his bravado gone. The air inside the farmhouse was thick, almost suffocating, and they could hear a faint whispering, as if the house itself was alive, murmuring secrets in an ancient language. They held their breath, listening, trying to make sense of the sounds. The whispering grew louder, merging with the echo of the scream they had heard outside. Then, from the corner of his eye, Lucas saw something move through a crack in the wall. A tall, dark figure was walking slowly through the cornfield, its limbs unnaturally long and thin, its movements stiff and jerky. The figure stopped just outside the farmhouse, tilting its head as if it could sense them hiding inside. Did you see that? Lucas whispered, fear turning his voice into a rasp. The figure outside let out a deep, guttural groan, a sound that sent chills down their spines. It began circling the farmhouse, its footsteps slow and deliberate, like it was waiting for them to make a mistake. "We have to get out of here," Sarah said, her voice trembling. They nodded, moving quietly to the back door. But as soon as they stepped outside, the figure was there, standing in the darkness, its eyes glowing faintly. It let out another scream, louder and more horrifying than before, a sound that seemed to shake the ground beneath them. They ran, stumbling through the cornstalks, the scream echoing behind them as the figure pursued them. The cornfield felt like it was closing in on them, the rows shifting and twisting, trapping them in a maze with no way out. The figure's footsteps grew closer, its twisted shadow stretching across the ground as it reached out, almost touching them. Finally, they burst through the edge of the field, collapsing onto the road. The scream faded, leaving only silence and the cold night air. They scrambled to their feet and ran to their car, too terrified to look back. As they sped away, Lucas glanced in the rearview mirror. The field was empty, silent once more. But in the distance, just barely visible, he thought he saw a figure standing at the edge of the field, watching them leave. They never spoke about that night again. The silent field remained a mystery, its secrets hidden among the tall cornstalks. But on certain nights, when the wind was just right, some said they could still hear the faint echo of a scream drifting through the town, reminding them that something dark lingered in the cornfield, waiting for its next visitor. The silent stalker of the corn. In a small, isolated farming community called Eldridge Hollow, the autumn harvest was usually a time of joy and celebration. Farmers would gather to share stories and laughter, their homes filled with the aroma of baked goods and freshly picked crops. Children would chase each other through the fields, their laughter ringing like music in the crisp air. But this year was different. As the days grew shorter and the air turned cold and still, an unsettling silence blanketed the fields. The cornstalks stood tall and still, casting eerie shadows under the pale moonlight, while the laughter of children faded into whispers of fear. The townsfolk whispered about a legend, a ghostly figure known as the Silent Stalker. It was said to roam the cornfields at night, seeking vengeance for an ancient wrong. Many dismissed it as mere superstition, but as strange occurrences began to plague the town, fear gripped the hearts of even the most skeptical. Crops wilted overnight, livestock went missing, and an inexplicable chill seeped into the bones of anyone who dared to approach the fields after sunset. As autumn deepened, the air grew heavy with tension. Some residents reported seeing fleeting shadows in the corn at dusk, while others claimed to hear faint whispers carried on the wind, beckoning them closer to the fields. Children began to stay indoors after dark, fearful of the stories they had heard from their parents. The once vibrant market square was now eerily quiet, with merchants reluctant to sell their produce, as if the land itself was cursed. The local bar, once a hub of laughter and camaraderie, became a gathering place for fearful townsfolk to share tales of the silent stalker. Old Man Thompson, a fixture in the bar with a grizzled beard and a voice like gravel, recounted how his grandfather had encountered the spirit decades ago. He saw it on a moonlit night, gliding between the rows of corn, its eyes glowing like embers, he warned, his voice low and shaky. It took him years to speak of it, and even then, he barely whispered its name. The patrons listened, wide-eyed, as they clutched their drinks, glancing nervously at the door. Then came the disappearances. First it was old Mrs. Jenkins, a kind-hearted woman known for her delicious apple pies, who had been tending her vegetable garden late one night. She had stepped out for a moment to collect herbs, and when her husband called for her, there was no answer. The following week, young Tommy Harris vanished without a trace, last seen walking towards the cornfields to retrieve his lost ball. As the sun set on the village, the townsfolk gathered in the town square, their faces pale with fear and uncertainty. "We must do something!" cried Clara, the local historian who had dedicated her life to preserving the town's stories. "We cannot allow this darkness to continue. The stalker feeds on our fear and despair." The townspeople murmured in agreement, but what could they do against such an unknown force? Sheriff Collins, a grizzled veteran of the law, felt the weight of their expectations pressing down on him. He had investigated every lead, but found nothing. As the chilling autumn nights wore on, he too began to believe the tales of the silent stalker. Desperate to find answers, a group of brave souls, including Sheriff Collins, his skeptical deputy named Jake, Clara, and a few courageous young townsfolk, Megan, a spirited girl with an adventurous spirit, and Lucas, a quiet boy with an eye for detail, decided to confront the darkness. Armed with flashlights and their wits, they entered the cornfield one fateful night, their hearts pounding with both fear and determination. The moon shone brightly, illuminating the maze of towering stalks, but an unnatural chill hung in the air, wrapping around them like a cold shroud. As they ventured deeper, whispers echoed around them, chilling them to the bone. "Do you hear that?" Clara asked, her voice trembling. The others nodded, their eyes darting between the stalks. Shadows danced in their periphery, and a feeling of being watched enveloped them. Suddenly, a rustle broke the silence, sending a jolt of fear through their hearts. "Maybe we should turn back," Jake suggested, his bravado faltering. But Sheriff Collins pressed on, determined to uncover the truth. The group continued deeper into the field, their flashlights flickering against the darkened corn. Panic set in as they became disoriented within the maze of corn. They split up, hoping to find a way out, but this only heightened their fear. Alone, each faced their deepest fears as the silent stalker revealed itself, an apparition of a vengeful spirit, cloaked in darkness, its face obscured, but its eyes glowing with fury. The creature whispered their secrets, feeding on their guilt and regret. "You ignored me," it hissed, echoing their own self-doubt. Clara found herself in a small clearing, trembling as she remembered her childhood visits to the field, the games of hide-and-seek that had turned into nightmares as the stories of the stalker grew. Her heart raced as she recalled the night her best friend had gone missing, the whispers in the cornfield that had silenced their laughter. She had been too scared to search for her, and the guilt weighed heavily on her heart. Meanwhile, Sheriff Collins faced a different kind of reckoning. As the leader of the town, he felt the weight of every decision he had ever made. Had he done enough to protect his community? Had he ignored the cries for help from the land itself? The stalker seemed to embody all the fears he had buried deep within, rising to the surface with a chilling clarity. The ghostly figure taunted him with memories of the town's history, each recollection a reminder of the mistakes made and the lives lost to neglect. Megan and Lucas stumbled upon an old, crumbling scarecrow standing guard over a section of the field that seemed untouched by the growing darkness. Its straw limbs were twisted and worn, its button eyes staring vacantly. "This is where it all began," Megan whispered, a shiver running down her spine. Lucas nodded, recalling the stories of how the original farmer had cared for the land, nurturing it until a drought forced him to abandon it. The scarecrow, once a protector, now stood as a monument to forgotten promises. In the heart of the cornfield, the remaining survivors uncovered the truth. The stalker was a guardian of the land, wronged by generations of neglect and betrayal. They had to confront their own guilt and seek forgiveness to appease the spirit. As they regrouped, they shared their fears, each confession cutting through the oppressive silence of the field. They spoke of their regrets, the mistakes made, and the lives lost to neglect. As dawn approached, they came together, chanting an ancient prayer, asking for forgiveness for the wrongs of the past. The wind howled as the stalker loomed closer, its form shimmering in the early light. In that moment of vulnerability, the survivors felt a shift. The spirit paused, as if considering their plea. With each word, the atmosphere lightened, the heavy darkness beginning to lift. With a final chilling cry, the silent stalker dissipated into the morning mist, leaving the cornfield eerily silent once more. The remaining townsfolk emerged, forever changed by their encounter, and vowed to honor the land and its history. They established a new tradition, holding an annual harvest festival that celebrated not only the crops, but also the spirit of the land and those who had once lived upon it. As time passed, the community began to heal. They held gatherings to honor those who had been lost, planting new seeds in the fields, not just for crops, but for a renewed sense of purpose. Clara organized story-sharing nights where residents could recount their memories of the past, weaving tales of joy and sorrow together, ensuring that the history of Eldridge Hollow would never be forgotten. The tale of the silent stalker became a part of their heritage, a haunting yet necessary reminder of the consequences of neglect and the importance of acknowledging the past. The fields thrived once more, filled with laughter and life, but the townsfolk knew they could never forget the lessons learned in the shadows of the corn. Every autumn, as the harvest moon rose high in the sky, they would gather in the fields, sharing stories and celebrating the land that had once haunted them. The silent stalker, now a symbol of redemption rather than fear, reminded them of their responsibility to care for their home and to honor the spirits of the past that watched over them. And as the sun set each night, casting a warm glow over the cornfields, the townsfolk would glance toward the horizon, feeling a sense of peace, knowing they had made amends and forged a new path for generations to come. Lost in the cornfield. In the heart of rural America, nestled between miles of desolate farmland, lay the small town of Eldridge. The town was known for its sprawling cornfields, which stretched endlessly under the bright sun. But as day turned to night, whispers of an unsettling legend filled the air, the legend of the cornfield that had taken the lives of several locals. The townspeople spoke of strange occurrences, shadows flickering between the stalks, disembodied voices drifting through the air, and eerie laughter echoing at dusk. No one dared to enter the cornfield after sunset. Yet for two adventurous teens, Jake and Sarah, the stories only fueled their desire to explore. One late summer evening, as the sun sank behind the horizon, Jake and Sarah gathered their courage and flashlights, convinced they would debunk the myth. "It's just a bunch of corn," Jake laughed, slapping Sarah on the back. "What's the worst that could happen?" As they entered the cornfield, the vibrant colours of sunset faded into an unsettling grey. The towering stalks loomed over them like prison bars. The air was thick with an unnatural silence, broken only by the occasional rustle of the wind. Jake's bravado began to wane. "Maybe we should just stick to the edges," he suggested, glancing nervously at the darkening expanse ahead. But Sarah, eager for adventure, pressed on. "Come on, Jake. We need to see how far we can go." With each step deeper into the field, the atmosphere shifted. The light from their flashlights flickered, casting eerie shadows that seemed to reach out for them. Suddenly, a chilling wind swept through the cornfield, carrying with it a faint, haunting whisper. "Turn back. Turn back." The voices were soft yet insistent, sending a chill down their spines. Jake's confidence crumbled. "Did you hear that?" he whispered, his eyes wide with fear. "Just the wind," Sarah replied, though her voice trembled, but the whispers grew louder, wrapping around them like a thick fog. "Help us! Help us!" Panic began to set in. "Maybe we should go back," Jake urged, but Sarah was already stepping further into the darkness, driven by a mix of fear and curiosity. As they navigated the maze of corn, the path seemed to twist and turn, disorienting them. With each corner they turned, the whispers grew more frantic, echoing their fear. "This isn't right," Jake panted, his heart racing. "We're lost." Suddenly, they stumbled upon a clearing, the moonlight illuminating a small, dilapidated scarecrow standing eerily in the center. Its straw-stuffed body looked almost human, and its hollow eyes seemed to watch them. Sarah felt a shiver run down her spine. "Jake, let's get out of here," she urged, but it was too late. From the shadows, a figure emerged, a ghostly apparition, its face twisted in a permanent scream. "You should not have come here," it shrieked, the sound slicing through the night like a knife. Jake and Sarah froze, terror locking them in place. "Run!" Jake shouted, and they sprinted back toward the corn, but the stalks seemed to close in around them. The whispers turned into manic laughter, echoing off the corn, mocking their fear. "You can't escape!" they jeered. In a desperate bid to survive, they pushed through the corn, the sounds of the apparition growing closer. But no matter how fast they ran, the cornfield twisted and turned, trapping them within its depths. Shadows danced around them, and the air grew heavy with despair. Just as hope began to fade, they spotted a dim light in the distance, a small farmhouse barely visible through the maze. "We can make it!" Sarah yelled, and they bolted toward the light. But the ground shook, and a deafening roar erupted from the cornfield, shaking them to their core. They finally broke free from the stalks and stumbled onto the path leading to the farmhouse. The front door stood ajar, beckoning them inside. They dashed in, slamming the door behind them, hearts racing. But the laughter continued outside, a chilling reminder of the horrors they had narrowly escaped. As dawn broke, the sun rose over Eldridge, casting a golden glow over the cornfield. But the two friends were changed forever, haunted by what they had experienced. The townsfolk would find them later, shaken and terrified, but their warnings would go unheeded. The cornfield remained, a dark spectre over the town, waiting patiently for the next unsuspecting souls to wander into its grasp. And as night fell once more, the whispers began anew, echoing through the fields, reminding all who heard them that some legends are rooted in truth, and the cornfield would never forget.